All right. Well, thank you, Professor, for joining me today at on our first podcast of the year, hosted by Cubcaps. So I wanted to start off by asking you, where did you kind of grow up? Where did you first start your journey?
First, I just want to say what a great idea this is for Cubcaps and for you to organize this. So it's like I congratulate you. I think it's a great step in the right direction. So I was born and raised in Brantford, Ontario. It's about a city about 100 kilometers southwest of Toronto, and so it's in that region. I went to elementary school, high school, all there, and I then left there to go to university, and I think that you're going to talk about the follow-up after.
Yes, we'll get there. Oh, so in that case, you kind of started your high school and all that in near Toronto.
Yeah, exactly. It's a small city. It's like not like it's a suburb town, sort of a commuting town to Toronto. But at one point, they had a lot of industry, particularly factories for generating machinery for farm equipment. And so that's where my father worked for many years.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I also grew up in the suburbs of Montreal before. Well, Montreal, but not Toronto. And I slowly made my way down to the center of the city. So, so let me start by reading your introduction, if you don't mind. So Pat Forgione received his bachelor's in honors chemistry at the University of Waterloo and his PhD in organic chemistry at the University of Ottawa. He also received his postdoctoral fellowship at the Ohio State University. It's kind of interesting because you kind of left into the States there.
Yeah, and I think that it's not uncommon, and at least at that time that was pretty common, that people that were doing PhDs would oftentimes get a postdoctoral fellowship. And I would say, more than half the times it would be outside of Canada. It wouldn't always be, but a lot of people would go to the United States or to Europe to do those postdoctoral fellowships.
Yeah, Europe is pretty popular. So.
Yes.
So following his completion of his PhD, or postdoctoral fellowship, he worked as a medicinal chemist at the industry level for 5 years. In 2008, he decided to return to academia and join the Department of Chemistry and Biology at Concordia University, where he is now a full professor and leads the Forgione Research Group housed at the brand new Science Hub building. His research interests consist of organic methods development, medicinal chemistry, and green chemistry applications. Over his career, Dr. Forgione published over 70 papers and is also a co-inventor on 14 patents involving anti-cancer agents and HCV inhibitors to treat various types of cell cancers and hepatitis C viruses. So, as I read, you worked a lot with HCV inhibitors. Do you want to kind of expand?
As a synthetic organic chemist, that's what my training is in. So I make small molecules. And after my postdoctoral fellowship at Ohio State University, the typical career path for synthetic organic chemists is usually going to a pharmaceutical company. And so I applied to a number of different pharmaceutical companies and I received offers from a few of them. And Boehringer Ingelheim, which was located at that time, the research center was in Laval. And so I took a position there. And so their main focus was on virology, so antivirals. And so they were, at the time I joined, were really focused on two main viruses. One was HIV and the other one was HCV. Mm-hmm. And so I can't say that I had a particular interest in HCV upon joining the company. It's really that was the company's interests. And I joined and I was sort of assigned to a project in HCV. It could have easily been like, some of my friends and colleagues got assigned to projects of HIV. And I don't think it was because either of us preferred one or the other. It was just sort of more of a matter of need. But then after you start, you realize what an interesting target HCV was at the time. And, Boehringer was really a leader in that field. So it was exciting to be involved in that process because they were really quite advanced. So we were trying to develop they had already spent a number of years prior to my arrival developing a compound. And so I was really part of that last push to push a compound into clinical trials. And so that was exciting because the drug discovery process is a very long one. And if you get involved right from the beginning, it could be 10 years before you see a drug in clinical trials. But because I was entering this program at the end, that we were close to a clinical trial compound, that my efforts were able to, in collaboration with many other researchers, I was able to design a compound that was suitable for clinical trials that reached phase 3 clinical trials for HCV as an antiviral. So phase 3 now, in terms of clinical trials, you have phase 1, which is a safety, to make sure the compound is safe. And then phase 2 and phase 3 are really proofs of principle in human models to make sure you're curing that disease. So we got all the way to phase 3, and it showed that it had antiviral activity against HCV and that it was curing the patients. Unfortunately, for business reasons, they just sort of had to drop that program, and it never, unfortunately, reached the market. But it was sort of an interesting, very interesting as a scientist to be involved with that.
Yeah, I know for many clinical trials, a lot of target drugs, they fail at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting because scientifically it was a really great achievement. So there's no denying that what we achieved at Boehringer Ingelheim was outstanding science. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with pharmaceutical companies, it's not just about the science. There's also a business component to it, and so the business side of the company had to make a tough decision, and that was a tough decision not to pursue marketing that drug.
And so in that case, did you carry any of these, any of your talents at your industry job into your academic work later on?
Yeah, I think that definitely has been something that, and I think that a lot of academics can achieve this over time, but I think that having some experience outside of the academic world has made me a little bit different than some of my colleagues in terms of experience, because I entered, the quote unquote real world, and I got to see sort of the professionalism, the way that they behave, the expectations, sort of evaluations of people on a regular basis. So these are more industry type thought processes where somebody who has spent their entire career, like done an undergraduate, graduate studies, postdoctoral fellowship, and then obtained an academic position, they've essentially never left academics. Mm-hmm. And so they haven't seen sort of how industry functions. And I think that you can sort of get that information indirectly, but there's nothing like getting that from direct involvement of being in industry. And I think that has provided me a unique perspective as an academic that I see as slightly different, not necessarily better or worse than my colleagues, but different than some of my colleagues.
So in that case, I guess you suggest that students that are graduating from their bachelor's degree, that they should probably pursue industry level for just a little bit of time before pursuing other academic achievements.
So that's an interesting question, and I think that maybe I'm overly humble in terms of what I suggest to people, and I think that there's no path that is right for everybody. And so, although I gained a lot of value from being in industry, I think that there's nothing wrong with staying in academics your entire career either. Like mm-hmm. that could be the path that's best for you. Mm-hmm. And I think that you have to really follow your own path, and we all have to make our own path. So what I do is I try to provide the information on what I found valuable about the path I've chosen. Mm-hmm. And then I allow people to then take that information and see if it's useful for them or not useful for them. Because for some, it won't be. Some will say, no, I want to stay in academics my whole career, and that is the best path. And you can have huge success doing that.
Absolutely. That's kind of my path at the current moment.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of staying in the academic realm for quite a bit, and then finally at the end pursuing the career that I choose, But
yeah, and I think that's fine. I don't think that industry is for everybody.
Yeah, it's good as a maybe part-time job as well in your undergraduate. I know there's a lot of opportunities as well for students to kind of get exposure to that, especially the labs that they hold at Concordia University. They're very hands-on to what you're doing in the actual industry level sometimes. So
Yeah, but I think that even more important than the actual technical skills that you might do in industry, you might learn in industry, is the soft skills, like interpersonal relationships, team building, working with a team, motivating other people. Like those types of skills are sort of the softer skills, and I think that sometimes is undervalued in academia. We look at it more as everybody's their own island doing their own projects, and I think that that's what industry really reinforces, is that there's a lot of other soft skills that you can learn from them. That then, if you apply it to academics, you can still live on your island, but you can achieve even more because now you have some of these other skills, which allows you to collaborate with, let's say, other researchers in your lab, or maybe it allows you to establish a new collaboration with a research group outside of your group. And that can just that just diversifies the thinking of the science. And I think that is only going to be more valuable the more diverse we are in terms of our thinking.
absolutely. So in that case, why don't you tell me about your current students and your graduate students in your lab, and maybe how you apply your learned soft skills into their work to kind of make them work together.
Yeah, so the main things that I sort of learned from industry is having regular progress towards the goals that you need to achieve. And so how we try to do that in my research group is we have regular group meetings. And so we'll have a group meeting where everyone's involved, and we'll have different types of presentations. So students will present in those group meetings, and they'll be either presenting some research that they've done in the recent past. It might be some research paper that they found in the literature that's particularly interesting. Presentation that we call Why Can't We? And that's just sort of an idea in the literature that is something that another research group is doing. And, and it's why can't we implement that process into our lab? And so it's sort of a way to express creativity from the students to be able to, make changes in the lab. And I think I find it exciting because it's coming from the students. So when they are the ones that are implementing the change, they feel more empowered and therefore more involved in the research that they're doing. So the group meetings is one way, and then the other way is we have individual meetings with each of the students, and that's just to give them structure in terms of that regular progress. So they give a brief update on where they've gone and where they plan to go over the next 2 weeks. And so that's the general way. And now, coming out of the pandemic, I've had some feedback from the group, and one of the things that they've said is that the formality of the every 2-week meeting maybe is too formal, and there's not enough informal meetings, sort of to discuss research. And so therefore, I've started just recently to try to make it those biweekly meetings are still in place, but we now have also me going through the lab and sort of informally discussing things with students to try to get that it's not always a formal presentation, that we have to have a meeting between me and the student. I think that you told me that you were working on an undergraduate research project in the Mayuski lab, and so I think you can appreciate the fact that research is really challenging, right? It's it can be very frustrating, and it can be time consuming, and you never know if you're going to get that positive result. There's a lot of failure. So so I think that to keep people motivated, it is important to make sure that you're involved and you're supporting them, because otherwise it can become very discouraging. And I think that you have to balance those things.
Precisely. Yesterday, I was looking through my data, and it unfortunately did not work the way I planned it out to be. So I'm very grateful to have Dr. Majewski by my side to help me tell me what's going on and why this is happening, and have an idea as to how do I change the current protocol in order to make my synthesis have better results. So in that case, Professor, why don't you tell me a bit about what your graduate students are currently working on in their research group?
So I think that the general themes of my research group is really threefold. So one of them is we're just developing what I would consider cool new ways that we can produce molecules. And the way that we really focus on that is through decarboxylative arylations that are catalyzed by palladium. So that's the sort of the core focus of what we do. And I would say a sub-focus then is like CH activation of heteroarenes, and that's also done through palladium catalysis. So those are like sort of the key core reactions that we do. And then the applications of those chemistries are towards drug discovery normally and towards material science. So we can make things that are from a sort of oligothiophenes. So these are long, well-defined thiophene that can act as devices for electronics because they're capable of sort of the conjugation provides some very special properties. We have medicinal chemistry, so we have a number of programs in medicinal chemistry. One of the main ones that we're working on right now is an anti-cancer compound, which is in collaboration with Dr. Elisa Pickney in the Department of Biology at Concordia, but we also have a collaboration with Dr. Terry Hebert at McGill University as well on GPR68 agonists. So that's another area. And then the last area that we work on is sort of green chemistry, and that's sort of with a focus on the decarboxylative couplings, but more focused on furans. And so furans are a special class of compounds that are could be from renewable resources. And so we're taking those molecules as platform chemicals to try to develop a next generation of chemicals that are avoiding the use of petroleum-based starting materials and starting from biomass-based starting materials.
And for your green chemistry applications, do you also use like a specific green chemistry instrumentation, maybe like microwave reactors, in order to facilitate and make a long synthesis method into a one pot, perhaps?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. Definitely, so microwave chemistry is one of the things that we use quite regularly, and we're trying to that can really reduce the time for chemical reactions. So rather than a thermal reaction, which happens overnight, maybe 14 hours, we can sometimes shorten those reaction times to 8 or 16 minutes in a microwave reactor. So that's like definitely something which is interesting. The caveat being is that sometimes microwave reactors are not the greatest to be scaled up in industry because it's hard for you to get. It's easy to do a microwave reaction on a 20 milliliter scale, but to do it on a 2 liter scale requires a much bigger instrument, and it's sometimes difficult for you to be able to implement it. But there's other sort of techniques that we also use. It's flow chemistry is another technique that we use that's also sort of along the lines of microwave chemistry, different technology, but sort of the same in terms of developing more green methods towards organic synthesis. And we just had a paper published, accepted for publication in the Journal of Flow Chemistry. So that's sort of our real first foray into that area.
That sounds fantastic. I hope it works out.
Yeah.
And so in your research group, what are you looking for as a student that wants to join your group? So what type of personality traits, strengths are you looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, we're a synthetic organic chemistry group. So that's like what my students do on a day-to-day basis. So definitely having, the undergraduate courses in organic chemistry is very important, and having a strong, track record. So good grades in those Chem 221, Chem 222, Chem 324. That's really like the key sort of components that I look for. In terms of their personality traits, I mean, by far the most important personality trait for a graduate student is perseverance. Like that is like so important because there's a lot of failure in research. And so you need somebody who's going to really roll up their sleeves and dig in their heels and really solve those problems, which, can take months and sometimes years to really break through to you finally achieving something which is worthy of publication. So perseverance is definitely an important skill. The thing about perseverance is I don't think it's very easy for you to identify students with perseverance just through discussion with them. I think perseverance is one of those things where you see over time who has perseverance or who doesn't. And in terms of the skills that I can actually identify more easily when they're interviewing for a position in my lab is really enthusiasm. Like, I think enthusiasm and their willingness to work in a group atmosphere, because I think that, I try to stimulate a group atmosphere that everyone is in it together and we're all helping each other succeed. And I think that a rising tide lifts all boats. And I really believe in that. So it's like, if I'm successful, my students are successful. If each of my students are successful, they're making the other students successful as well. So, but in order for us to do that, we have to really help each other. We have to help each other, with cleaning glassware in the lab. We have to help each other with ordering chemicals. We have to help each other with fixing instruments when they break down, because that affects all of us. And I really want students that are willing to participate and be helpful to each other, because I think that's the best way that we can stimulate creativity and stimulate success. So I would say those are.
I think that, even as you say, students that may come into the lab with no perseverance can definitely gain interest and belongingness as they have their stay.
Absolutely.
It's very interesting.
And I think that, like, the other thing about perseverance is that, and I think you'll appreciate this doing a 419 project now, is that, undergraduate research labs are meant to work, right? That's the reason why we've put them in the organic labs or the inorganic labs. And so students are not used to failures in the lab, because all the labs that they do at an undergraduate level technically should work. Mm-hmm. And so then when you get to grad school, you're doing things that have never been done in the history of the world. That's what makes it so interesting and exciting, right? But because it's never been done in the history of the world, that means that it might not be possible. And so we have to do a lot of experiments to determine whether it's possible. And if it is possible, how can we optimize it to the best possible results, irrespective of whether you're an organic chemist, you're an inorganic chemist, you're whatever field you're in. That's what basic research is. That's what makes it exciting. But it also, I understand how a student coming from an undergraduate labs where they always are successful to going to graduate labs where they could be always failing. But that doesn't mean that they're a failure, right? It means that the experiment is failing. And for people to overcome that and change their mindset that failure is okay and is part of the process is something which is really challenging for that transition. And I think that students who understand that quickly are the ones that can succeed more quickly as a graduate student. The ones who are frustrated with that, it can take a longer time for them to develop that perseverance that we're talking about, which is really required for success as a graduate student.
Absolutely. And so in that case, what do you have as advice for a student that is, besides perseverance, the advice that you would give to a 419, 450 student that is interested in pursuing a lab for their project?
The first thing that they should do is contact a few professors in their research area. So if you're interested in organic chemistry, there's a number of different professors in our department that are working in organic chemistry, all with different specialties. And, just sending your undergraduate transcripts and sending an email with saying that you're interested in what terms you're interested in doing it. And ideally, not in the term that you wish to start. So if you want to start in, let's say, the fall of 2022, I would suggest, a few months before the fall of 2022 that you contact the professor. And then usually the professor will say, yes, I have room, or no, I don't have room. And if they say yes, they will have room, then normally they'll want to schedule some sort of meeting just to see your interest and see if there's a fit between you and their research area. I think that's really it, because I think most professors at Concordia, and this is one of the great things I think about our department, are very engaged in helping undergraduate students get research experience in the research labs. And I think that's really one of our strengths of our department as a whole. And so I think that if you contact a few professors in the research area that you want, I'm sure you're going to get a positive response from somebody.
And do you suggest more by email or more by an in-person encounter and kind of introducing yourself?
Yeah, I think that both are fine. I'm always enjoy meeting students face to face. So it's always, and the pandemic has definitely made that really challenging for everybody. But as we hopefully come out of this, that I think that the in-person one, like stopping by or seeing them in the hallway and just saying hi, I'm Zoe and I'm interested in pursuing work in inorganic chemistry, for example. That's a great way for you to sort of be seen as someone genuinely interested, because there's nothing better than seeing the excitement on your face when you say that I'm interested in your work, as opposed to an email, which is a little more impersonal. But I mean, I also understand that people are working and people have different schedules, so sometimes you can't do that in person. So, then you do it by email, and that's fine too.
You kind of see the perseverance on their face.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I unfortunately had I had to find my supervisor through the pandemic, so it was through email, unfortunately.
Right.
But once I came in person, as you were talking about the teamwork and the creativity of being in the lab, I really got that sense of togetherness in the lab, and I really thought it was such a wonderful experience compared to being at home all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask you as well, maybe circling back to yourself and your journey. So why did you want to become a medicinal chemist?
Yeah, that's a good question. So coming out of my postdoc, it was. I wasn't sure that I was meant to be an academic, to be a professor. So I sort of didn't even consider academic positions coming out of my postdoc. And so having sort of eliminated that as an option, the typical jobs for a synthetic organic chemist is in pharmaceuticals. And so I decided to pursue that area. And it's really, I really had no experience in terms of the biology or the biochemistry of drug discovery. I really was coming at it just purely from a chemistry perspective. So I can make molecules. If you tell me the molecules that you want to make that have a particular biological application, I can make those molecules. And so that's how I ended up pursuing that. And I tell people that then going to Boehringer Ingelheim in Laval in medicinal chemistry was sort of another postdoctoral fellowship, that because I didn't have that biology and biochemistry background, that all of the time that I spent there, it was a steep learning curve on biology, pharmacology, biochemistry, all of these areas that are important for drug discovery. And so that was really exciting to learn about all these other areas, which I hadn't had the privilege to learn as an undergraduate student or a graduate student. So that's really why I became a medicinal chemist. But then after the learning curve started to plateau, I really felt like the thing that in industry that was really driving me or inspiring me was supervising co-op students. So we had a number of co-op students that would come in for 4 or 8 months at a time, and mentoring them, guiding their lab experiences, publishing papers with them, because that's where we initiated our original project on the decarboxylative palladium catalyzed arylation reactions. I realized that was really even though that was only supposed to be a small part of my job, that was giving me the most satisfaction from my job in industry. And that's when I started to think about, maybe pursuing an academic position would be something that I would be interested in.
All right, Professor. Well, thank you very much for joining me today at the first Cubcaps podcast. I thank you so much for your time and for coming down. I really appreciate your story, and as well as your insight on how to join a Chem 419 or 450 lab. It's very interesting to know from a professor's perspective.
Great. And thank you, Zoe, and congratulations on starting this wonderful initiative. I look forward to the rest of the podcasts that you're going to produce over the next few months.